Vinci himself. As Piero said, it's his 500th anniversary of his death. What I'm going to cover is a very personal view of things that I've tracked down about Leonardo da Vinci that is maybe somewhat speculative. You won't read about almost any of this in textbooks, but it's an interesting, that's what keeps it interesting for me, is that it's a developing story. I thought it might be helpful to have a reminder of his dates and places that he traveled to. He was born in Vinci and traveled to Florence when he was about 14. Then around 30 he went to Milan. Then came back to Florence at about 1500. None of these dates are very well defined. He was invited to Rome in 1513 and went to, then was invited by the King of France to bring the Renaissance from Italy to France in 1516 and died at age 67 in 1519, 500 years ago. So that's as a reminder of the trajectory of his life. But I want to focus on his youth, what a period about which very little is known. There's just a few spotting inferences about what he did in his youth. I've developed a picture that I want to present that you can take or leave as your preference. But this is my understanding of how he's likely to have spent his youth. Of course, in Florence, this is a nice picture of Florence in just about when he arrived in Florence. It has I'm lacking a point of it. It has at the top the central plaza, the Piazza della Signoria, and the Duomo, and there's this nice figure at the bottom right drawing a picture of Florence. And I found a nice detailed blow-up of this. We can imagine Leonardo engaging in this drawing himself of the city. The central square here is shown in a painting from 1498, and when he moved to live with his father in Florence, it was on the Via Prestanza, which is just back along from the central square. So the Medici were holding court in the main castle there, main building, and Leonardo was just around the corner. He was a very central figure in Florence at the time. In the piazza was a sculpture of David, who was kind of a patron saint of Florence, that was sculpted by his master, Andrea del Verrocchio. It made this very appealing sculpture. And this is a clue to not only Leonardo's activities, but what he actually looked like when he was young, because many people think that the portrait was based on Leonardo himself at this age. A very graceful figure. And he was renowned as being a very athletic young man. He'd grown up in the mountains, and he was a great horseman, and we can well imagine that he is considered to be extremely graceful. So this is a very typical concept of what he was like. So the close-up view. So let's look at the suggestion that it might be Leonardo as depicted by himself in this drawing when he was old, aging. So we can overlay the sculpture with the drawing, and you see the features seem to line up very well. The shape of the nose, position of the eye and the mouth. This is kind of pictorial evidence I like to use to support the inferences I'm going to be talking to you about. So another work that's relevant in the story is this portrait of a musician. For a long time it was of doubtful attribution. Nowadays, art historians typically think it's by Leonardo, I'll show you in a minute why I think it might be by Botticelli, who was his contemporary and worked with Verrocchio, together with Verrocchio, and maybe a portrait of Da Vinci. So here's the sculpture again. So if this is Da Vinci, you see again there's a lot of similarity in the features. And this is a painting of a musician. This marking on, he's holding music, and the marking says cant ang, which is interpreted to mean canticorum angelicum, the music of the angel. And so we can envisage Leonardo as a musician at that time. Here's a contemporary painting of a musician playing the lyra da braccio, and he's reputed to have built his own musical instruments. Indeed, to have made a lyra da braccio out of a silver carving of a horse's head, harking back to his interest in horses, which he's supposed to have taken with him to Milan. This is a reconstruction that you can find in actually in Milan of the kind of how he might have built this kind of musical instrument. So again, he had this kind of widespread reputation as a musician. These are paintings by his contemporaries from the same studio of musicians. He was not only a musician, he was a rap master. He could make up, he could extemporize songs for any occasion. So when the Medici had some kind of celebration, Leonardo da Vinci would be there making up a rap song to suit the occasion. This is what a broad spectrum intellect he really was. So this is all very speculative, but along with my friend David Stork here, who connected me with William Smith, was able to develop some quantitative evidence in support of these hypotheses. Now, I'm not going to give you the details, but he was able, William Smith was able to construct three-dimensional models based on these various portraits. I haven't covered them all, and show that they match a three-dimensional face template that's very similar across the cases that are likely to have been Leonardo, and conversely very different from portraits of other people. So there was quantitative support of this idea that he was that these are portraits of him. Now another line of thinking is, I talked about Botticelli. These are all Botticelli paintings. These are details of the faces of paintings you can find around the world of young men in a red cap that I pulled together and said, why are there all these portraits of unnamed young men in red caps? So this is an interesting sort of art historical question, and the answer came when I looked at portraits of his stablemates, of the apprentices in Verrocchio's studio, when they grew up and became adult artists and painted their own self-portraits. And these are my identifications of each of Leonardo's friends, or compatriots, that you can make your own judgment whether you agree that this is a good match, and that the red cap was actually you can imagine all these young apprentices going around town together, all wearing red caps and feeling rather pleased with themselves. This is captured in many paintings, such as this Adoration by Botticelli, where he used the crowd scene to give you a sense of life in Florence at the time. It's well established art historically that this side of the picture shows the Medici family. The old man there is Cosimo de' Medici. The young man with the dark hair is Lorenzo the Magnificent. And the person over on the right is his brother Giuliano, and Botticelli's self-portrait on the right. So this is established in art history, but nobody asked who the people were on the left. identifications are that this very proud-looking figure is again Leonardo da Vinci, counterposed, you see, with Botticelli, and next to a horse. He was, as I said, a famous horseman, so the horse is part of his identification. And the other figures here are identifiable as the rest of Verrocchio's studio, with Verrocchio in the front. Heading up the studio, I won't go through all their names, but these are the same red caps that I showed you before. So now, having these kind of identifications and being in the field, I'm running a little late, so I won't be able to go through as much detail. These identifications led me, being in the field of vision science and optometry or whatever, to look at the eyes on these sculptures. I have a paper in the JAMA Ophthalmology just recently, and the technique I use to look at the eyes is just to outline the eyelid aperture and the irises and measure the positions. And I did so on a number of paintings, works such as these, looking close up, and was able to identify the alignment of the two eyes, the binocular alignment. And in all except one case here, the eyes are diverged. They're exotropic. The divergence of the eyes, or what's often called a lazy eye alignment. And the one that was straight has a curious anisocoria, difference in pupil size, as though he's trying to convey a difference between the eyes. So I don't have time to detail that story, but the idea is that it suggests that Leonardo may have had the condition of intermittent exotropia, which means that he could have his eyes straight, or if he was inattentive, they could be diverged. And this might have given him a different insight into the 2- and 3-dimensionality of the world and the canvas that he's trying to paint the world on. I want to look at another aspect of his personality, which is his love of mountains. Leonardo put very vivid mountains in the background of almost all his paintings, something that almost no other artist of the period did. They would typically have wooded hills or lakes or something, but very few of them had anything like alpine mountains. And so I want to focus on the Mona Lisa, which again has these kind of alpine mountains. They're rather dark and overlaid with old varnish, but we can get a better look at them from this work that it was considered to be like the Mona Lisa. So they cleaned the background. This is the Prado Mona Lisa. They cleaned the background and found, oh, look, it's identical in structure with the Mona Lisa. This enhances our question of where do these mountains derive from when you have them brought out so vividly like this. So if we, this is if you blow up the Mona Lisa mountains, it's very, the background, it's rather hard to see the detail. You see it rather more clearly in this new one. And my identification is that it looks rather like Lake Como, where Bellagio is. I was honored to have a fellowship in Bellagio for a month, and you can see it has very much the same look as the background of the Mona Lisa. Now, why Lake Como? What's, is that some arbitrary lake in Italy? No, it turns out that it's due north of Milan. This is the castle in Milan where Leonardo spent 15 years. And if he looks north, he can see the mountains. the mountains from the center of Milan. This is a telephoto view of the mountains that he would have seen. And this is the Mona Lisa. There's a feature there, I'm not quite sure if I've captured it, called the Fingers of God in Italian.
Le dita di Dio?
Yes. The point is that they're kind of straight, they're kind of parallel at a slight angle, and he has the same feature in the Mona Lisa. We know that he drew mountains. This is one of his drawings. This is a profile of the Alps from just north of Milan that I found that seems to match the drawing of Leonardo da Vinci. Here's the other side of the picture. It has a bridge in it. This is by art historians associated with a bridge near Arezzo, south of Florence. But there's a similar bridge on Lake Como, on the beginning of Lake Como, which is a town called Lecco. And the Lecco website, they have this identification. I couldn't find it in any art history book, but in Lecco they think that this is the bridge that Leonardo is painting. This bridge was built by Antonio Visconti, who was the predecessor in the castle of Milan, so before Leonardo was there. It's been there since the 13th century and looks very much like the bridge that Leonardo painted. Now, this is Leonardo's first painting, possibly with collaboratively with people in his studio. It has absolutely perfect perspective in the building part of it, focusing on a vanishing point in these mountains, which are it's a very appealing background scene with these very strong mountains and a lake and a beautiful resort town with the towers that looks a lot like Lecco. There's only one tower left, but they specifically, historically, there were many towers in Lecco, just like the painting that Leonardo painted. And so I just want to pin down the fact that this is really close to where he was for 15 years. It's behind the screen for many of you. This is Milano. Milan is here. Just go a little bit north, you come to Lecco. Go up Lake Como. Leonardo, in his notebooks, describes a time when he trekked all the way up Lake Como and along the Val Tellino, which is the top valley there, which is just below the Alps, just below San Moritz. It was all snowy. He talked about how snowy and rugged the mountains were. So this is Leonardo country. Now I want to end with a brief excursion into, on the map theme, into Leonardo's cartography, which I was able to get published in the IMCOS Journal of Cartographers. He's well known. Leonardo's well known as a cartographer. Here's a map he drew. Early in his career, he was interested in globes, and in fact, he worked with his master on the Duomo in Florence, installing the 8-ton copper ball on top of the 300 feet up on top of the Duomo. This is the pinnacle of the completion of this thing. And I want to draw the relationship between, this is what I think is a portrait of Leonardo and of Toscanelli. Now Toscanelli was a mathematician and cartographer who installed the gnomon in Florence Cathedral, which was the first device to measure the passing of the seasons by a hole in the Duomo. This was in 1468, just about a couple of years before Leonardo was in the same Duomo installing the copper ball. Not only that, Toscanelli published with Nicholas de Cusa a treatise on squaring the circle, a big topic in Renaissance Florence, and of course the topic of the most familiar diagram of Leonardo, squaring the circle. Now Toscanelli drew the map, or is reputed to have drawn the map that Columbus used to come to America, to discover America. This is supposed to be, I don't understand it, but this is supposed to be a reproduction of that map. And that led to the first map to use the term America. This is by Martin Waldseemüller. This is his map from 1507. Again, this is Leonardo's prime of life now. And there's one very obscure globe construction that is found in Leonardo's papers, and it is this. I came across it on the web, I was amazed. It is not mentioned in any of the 20 books on Leonardo's life that I have in my library. Not one mention. But he didn't just map one town, he mapped the entire globe. This is the first isotropic map of the entire globe. Here's a modern version of the same octant map, peeling off 8 octants, mapping the globe onto those as a way of flattening it. I don't have time to run this comparison with Europe. This is an actual globe made of 2 ostrich egg halves that has a similar look. Nobody knows who made this, but to me it's interesting that it has a similar look to this globe map of Leonardo's. So what's the evidence really linking this map, even though it's in his papers and maybe somebody else put it there? Well, the evidence is this page of his notes. He has thousands of pages of notes. This page, he's exploring globe projections, globe mappings. And over to the right in this is his drawing of his own map. This means whether or not he actually did the lettering on the map I showed you, it's indubitable that he understood the concept, that it was his idea to use this kind of projection. So I've abstracted the 9 different projections on that one sheet of paper. So Leonardo understood all the globe projections that were available at that time, around 1510. It was early in the development, but nevertheless, there were at least 8 different projections. This is modern renditions of those 8 projections. And Leonardo's very novel approach to flattening out the entire globe. So those are the pieces of story I wanted to cover for you today. I just want to end with one completely different aspect of Leonardo, something I just recently was thinking about, a totally different view of time, non-Newtonian, non-Einsteinian, but turns out to be Da Vincian concept of time that matched my own thinking from a year ago. The instant does not have time, and time is made from the movement of the instant. Everything's a differential equation, but that's another talk. So thank you very much.